They said the signal died at 0600, but I remember the sound it made. A single pop in the headset, then wind, and the smell of burning insulation. The bird went down hard in black water, rotor blades still spinning somewhere under the surface. Metal, oil, breath. Everything slowed to the rhythm of survival. No radio, no chain of command, just pulse and purpose. She dragged 2 out before the cold took feeling from her hands, before the horizon even thought about light. In those minutes, rank didn't matter. Only resolve did. Tell me where you're watching from. And remember this. It wasn't about making it home. It was about not leaving anyone behind. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but its presence lingered. A thin mist hung over the asphalt, and the flag outside Camp Ashfall hung heavy with moisture. The world was gray and soft-edged, the kind of morning where sound carried differently, as if even the wind hesitated before crossing the base. At 0600 hours, the compound stirred with motion gates opening, boots on gravel, the mechanical rhythm of a place that should have been precise. A black government sedan rolled to a halt beside the administrative building. Its engine ticked once, twice, then fell silent. The door opened, and Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale stepped out. She adjusted her cover against the damp air, her uniform pressed, boots spotless. Nothing in her posture announced authority. She carried no visible insignia of rank, only the quiet bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. No one saluted. A young Marine jogged past, balancing a clipboard and half a cup of coffee. He didn't notice her. 2 more followed, talking too loudly, their conversation echoing down the concrete corridor between barracks. Hale's eyes followed them, sharp but unreadable. She walked slowly, taking in the base like a reconnaissance sweep the vehicles parked unevenly in the motor pool. A supply truck idling too long with no driver in sight. The faded paint on the training facility door. Camp Ashfall looked functional. It sounded like discipline. But something beneath that surface rhythm felt off, like a formation just slightly out of step. Her boots clicked in even time as she crossed toward the command offices. The flag above barely stirred. In the window's reflection, she watched the Marines behind her, shoulders slouched, gestures loose, the posture of a unit that had grown too comfortable. She had seen it before the slow erosion that came not from battle, but from peace. Inside the corridor, the air was cooler. The scent of floor wax mixed with machine oil, both fading. A bulletin board carried an old operations schedule dated 3 weeks back. A single thumbtack held one corner, the others hung loose. Hale paused. Her gloved hand pressed the paper flat. A trivial thing, but it told her everything she needed to know. A pair of Marines passed by, still talking. Their laughter carried, unchecked. No one noticed her standing there, the woman in regulation blues, eyes level, presence contained. It was not defiance that she felt in their tone. It was absence. The kind that grows when respect becomes routine, and command becomes just another sound. She continued down the hall, each step measuring silence against sound. The base's intercom crackled overhead, static, then a brief announcement about maintenance. The voice was casual, unhurried. Hale's gaze flicked toward the ceiling speaker, then back to the corridor ahead. Outside, the clouds began to thin. Light cut across the tarmac, silver against standing water. A squad moved in the distance, their cadence weak, the echo of boots soft and uneven. She stopped at the edge of the covered walkway and watched them. The tempo faltered, recovered, faltered again. No drill instructor corrected them. That was the moment she knew. Not from anger or shock, but from recognition. Discipline wasn't gone. It had simply gone unattended. Leadership, too, had dulled in the silence. Her gaze dropped to the ground, where a single dog tag lay in the puddle beside the walkway, half submerged in the rainwater. She bent, lifted it, wiped it clean. The name was familiar, one she had read in an incident report weeks earlier. She turned the metal over in her hand, thumb tracing the etched letters. A small detail, a forgotten tag, a clue to something deeper. The hum of distant engines rose, followed by the hollow clang of a closing hangar door. The base resumed its rhythm, unaware that it was being watched and assessed. Hale slipped the tag into her pocket, her expression unreadable. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the coastline beyond the wire. She straightened her cover again and walked toward the command building. Her reflection in the window was ghost-like, a figure between rain and light, authority still hidden. Every step forward carried the weight of observation, calculation, and quiet resolve. As she reached the threshold, the sound of boots behind her paused, as though instinct finally caught up to awareness. A Marine's half-salute flickered uncertainly in her peripheral vision. She did not return it. The door opened with a low, metallic groan. She stepped through without a word, the hum of fluorescent lights washing over her. The camera of the mind lingers on the closing door, on the silence that follows, thicker than the fog that once covered the base. Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale had arrived, and somewhere beneath the order and routine of Camp Ashfall, she had already sensed the fracture. Tomorrow, someone would push too far. But for now, the storm waited, patient as command itself. The corridors of Camp Ashfall carried their own kind of static, the noise of confidence without control. Boots scuffed instead of struck. Laughter echoed off concrete. Too casual, too long. The rhythm of military order had fractured into something less precise, a sound that mistook comfort for competence. Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale walked through it quietly. Her steps were steady, measured, absorbed into the hum of voices that didn't lower when she passed. She wore her uniform without flaw, her rank tabs clean and defined, but unseen. In a place that no longer looked for authority, the symbols meant nothing. The overhead fluorescence buzzed faintly, a pale wash over the operations corridor. Monitors flickered in the command office behind glass, showing routine reports and live feeds from the training fields. Marines drifted in and out, movements lazy, hands tucked into pockets, laughter in the hall where silence should have been. A sergeant leaned against a doorframe mid-story, gesturing with a coffee mug. Another Marine crossed between them. No salute, no acknowledgement. Hale paused near the wall map. The paper edges curled slightly, months of use without replacement. A faint line of dust traced where a ruler should have been drawn clean. Her eyes moved slowly over the marking sectors, coordinates, names. Someone had drawn a smiley face in the corner with dry erase. She stood still long enough to feel the weight of its meaning. Not rebellion, but erosion. From the far end of the corridor came the sound of boots, uneven cadence, careless rhythm. Two Marines rounded the corner, one swinging a wrench, the other laughing as he mimed a salute to no one in particular. The motion was exaggerated, mocking. Hale turned slightly toward them, her face calm, unreadable. They didn't see her. One brushed past, the wrench grazing her sleeve. The other followed, bumping her shoulder. Enough to make contact, enough to mark the beginning of something. Neither slowed. Their laughter faded down the hall, swallowed by the hum of machinery and distance. Hale didn't react, not outwardly. Her breath stayed even, her posture composed. The camera of the moment lingered, the ripple of her uniform where the impact had been, the faint outline of a shoe print half dried on the floor. She smoothed her sleeve once, the gesture deliberate, slow, and without emotion. The base continued around her, oblivious. Orders were shouted without conviction, reports exchanged with casual sloppiness. Someone dropped a metal clipboard in the motor bay. The clatter rang sharp against the empty air. No one looked up. She stepped into the operations room. Inside, maps and data flickered across monitors. A junior Marine sat at the console, spinning lightly in his chair as he scrolled through supply logs. He didn't notice her entrance. Not immediately. She stood behind him for 3 full seconds before he glanced back, eyes widening, not in respect, but confusion. He gave a curt nod. the kind given to a civilian visitor, then turned back to his screen. That was when she knew how deep it ran. The absence of recognition was not ignorance. It was culture, a rhythm built on unchecked tone, one day bleeding into another until rank itself lost gravity. As she turned to leave, the hallway beyond pulsed with light from the setting sun. The steel walls reflected the orange glow, softened by dust. A group of Marines passed carrying gear bags, laughing again, the same easy arrogance that filled the air like humidity. Hale stepped aside to let them through. One of them, broad-shouldered, with the careless confidence of unchecked power, moved too close. The collision wasn't hard, but deliberate. His arm caught her side, pushing her lightly, enough to jar her step. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. Not yet, but it lingered a moment too long. Then came the sound, a hollow, metallic thud as her shoulder struck the wall. Time thinned to silence. The air changed. Hale steadied herself against the cool surface, palm flat against steel. The reflection of the hallway lights shimmered faintly in the polished metal, her outline framed in it, still, centered, immovable. The voices faded behind her. Someone coughed. Another stifled a laugh. Then nothing. She didn't look back at them. Her breath was even, her eyes fixed forward. That silence was not retreat, it was recalibration. She adjusted her cover, the motion precise. Her hand brushed away the dust from the impact point, a gesture so small it became its own command. The tension that filled the air now was different, sharp-edged, electric. No one dared to meet her eyes. The moment stretched. 10 seconds, maybe more, before she stepped away from the wall. Each movement carried intention, not anger. She crossed the corridor slowly, boots aligning perfectly with each step, the sound measured and steady once more. Behind her, laughter had died completely. Her authority remained unseen, but no longer invisible. The camera of the mind lingers on her back as she exits the frame, light from the open door catching the side of her face. There's no score, no sound but the hum of the bass returning to motion. She leaves the dog tag in her pocket untouched. She doesn't need to look at it to remember. The moment of contact, the shove, the silence that followed, was more than insult. It was confirmation. Something at Camp Ashfall was coming undone. And though no one yet knew who she was, the stillness in her step told the story the storm had been noticed. Silence filled the corridor like fog, thick, suspended, alive. The shove still echoed somewhere in memory, its sound replaying against the steel and concrete walls. Even the hum of the air units seemed to pause, as if the base itself were waiting to see what she would do next. Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale did not move right away. The moment stretched, not frozen, but deliberate. Her hand remained pressed to the wall, palm open, fingers splayed across the cold surface. Beneath that stillness, a discipline decades deep recalibrated itself. Breath in, steady, eyes forward. The kind of calm born not from absence of fear, but mastery over it. The Marines stood in uneven formation, an audience by accident. Their laughter, the sound that had carried so easily before, had vanished into a brittle, uncertain quiet. Someone shifted their weight. Another cleared his throat. The one who had shoved her, taller, broad across the shoulders, stood half-turned away, his smirk fading under the weight of what he couldn't yet name. Hale straightened. No anger, no flinch, just presence. The light from the window fell across her shoulder, glinting off the small insignia on her collar, silver bars that no one had bothered to look at until now. The air changed as someone's eyes finally caught the shine. A subtle ripple of awareness moved through the group. She adjusted her cover, the brim casting a precise shadow across her eyes. Her movements were slow, practiced, the kind that didn't ask for attention but demanded it anyway. The tension in the air tightened like a drawn wire. Then came sound again, the soft scrape of a boot on concrete. The Marine who had pushed her took a step closer, more out of habit than defiance. His motion was meant to reclaim space, to reassert something slipping away. But before he could speak, before his weight could shift again, Hale's hand rose. Not fast, not aggressive, controlled. Her fingers caught the edge of his sleeve, redirecting rather than striking, her body pivoting in a single seamless motion that placed her beside him instead of before him. The Marine's balance faltered. His heel tapped against the wall where she had been moments earlier. It wasn't force that moved him. It was precision. A tactical correction measured in inches, executed without sound. And just like that, every illusion of dominance collapsed. The moment broke open. The same Marines who had looked through her now watched as if seeing something too bright to comprehend. Not spectacle. Revelation. She stepped back, posture perfectly aligned, breathing even. The hall felt smaller now, the air dense with recognition. No one moved. In the stillness that followed, the sound of a door opening at the far end echoed like thunder. A staff sergeant emerged from the adjoining corridor, one of the few who recognized her face immediately. His stride halted mid-step. His voice caught before it could form her name. Then, with instinct older than thought, he snapped to attention. That single motion, crisp, sharp, absolute, cracked the tension. Every Marine in sight followed, like a chain reaction of conscience reignited, boots aligned, shoulders squared. The room corrected itself without a word. Only then did Hale move. She faced them fully now, the light behind her softening into gold through the high window. The dampness of the morning had faded, replaced by the sterile chill of recycled air. Every eye followed her as she stepped forward. The Marine who had shoved her now stood frozen, jaw locked, face drained of its earlier arrogance. Hale stopped in front of him. The distance between them was measured, exactly one pace apart. Her gaze held steady, not hard, but exacting. She spoke, not in anger, but in tone, the low, level resonance of authority reclaimed. The words themselves were simple procedural, corrective, but their weight carried far beyond instruction. They landed as reminder that leadership is not posture and respect is not optional. She turned to the group, her composure unshaken. Her words moved through the corridor like a current, reshaping the air. She spoke of discipline not as punishment, but as structure, of chain of command, as protection, not oppression, of service as something earned each day, in the smallest acts of accountability. No one interrupted, no one shifted. The base itself seemed to listen. Her gaze swept across their faces, lingering on the small cracks of guilt, a downcast look, a clenched jaw, a hand twitching at the seam of a trouser leg. These were not bad Marines, she knew, just untethered ones. In her silence, they saw the cost of their complacency. Then came the formal moment. The staff sergeant stepped forward and called the space to order, his voice steady but subdued. The words, "Lieutenant Commander Hale," "Ma'am," hung in the air, though unspoken directly, understood by every mind present. Recognition spread like dawn across their faces. Hale gave no outward sign of satisfaction. Instead, she gave them structure, a clear, calm directive. The tasking was ordinary: training inspection, review of procedures, standardization drills. But beneath each word was a single unspoken message. You forgot who you were. Now, remember. As she finished, the camera of the scene held on her face, serene, unwavering. The authority she wielded wasn't new. It had simply been unseen. Now, it filled the room like light. When she stepped away, her footsteps echoed in rhythm, clean, measured, the sound of order returning. The Marines parted instinctively, creating a corridor of silence as she passed. No one breathed until she was gone. The man who had pushed her stood rigid, sweat gathering at his temple. The dog tag in her pocket pressed lightly against the fabric of her uniform as she walked. It was a reminder that leadership begins where ego ends. At the far end of the hall, Hale paused once more. She turned slightly, eyes scanning the formation she had rebuilt with nothing more than stillness and truth. Her final words came without volume. Quiet. But absolute respect isn't demanded. It's remembered. The scene held there, like the eye of a storm, still and clean, before fading to black. The silence after revelation did not fade quickly. It settled like dust after impact, heavy, visible, and unescapable. Every Marine in the operations base stood in the wake of Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale's quiet command. What had begun as humiliation now lingered as awakening. The stillness itself had become a form of instruction. Hale did not speak at first. She allowed the silence to teach for her. The base breathed in shallow rhythm, waiting for sound to return. Outside, wind swept across the training yard, carrying with it the faint rustle of flags now drying in morning light. The storm had broken, but what replaced it was sharper. Clarity. When Hale finally moved, it was with purpose measured down to each footfall. Her boots struck in rhythm, echoing through the operations corridor like a metronome of restored order. She entered the command tent, its air thick with the heat of machinery and guilt. Screens glowed with logistical data, maps layered in transparent overlays, lines of supply and patrol routes drawn in uneven hands. She stood over the central table, her reflection faint in the surface of the laminated map. Her gaze scanned the details, a recon grid misaligned by 400 yards, a mislabeled supply route, a pending sitrep left unsigned, each one small, forgettable on its own. Together, they told the story she already knew. Discipline had not vanished. It had atrophied. Her gloved hand reached for the red grease pencil beside the board. Without a word, she began to correct. The pencil moved with the precision of someone who had walked these routes, memorized these distances, lived the consequences of every error. The Marines around her followed her movements silently, the squeak of the pencil cutting through the room like a reminder of what accountability sounds like. She circled the grid, drew a straight line through the misplaced coordinates, marked 0500 hours beside the forward observation point. Then she turned the pencil down on the table and stepped back. It wasn't reprimand. It was recalibration. The staff sergeant nearest to her swallowed hard. His jaw twitched as he realized how obvious the oversight had been. Hale said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any order. It left room for conscience to do its own work. Outside, the sound of boots striking earth began to return, hesitant at first, then unified, as squads resumed morning drills under the renewed eye of command. The sunlight caught dust in the air, spinning it like motes of gold. From the distance, the cadence call started again, this time measured, sharper, its rhythm clean. Hale stepped outside into the light. The Marines had gathered in formation across the parade ground, eyes forward, posture corrected. She walked along the front line slowly, each step deliberate. Her inspection was not about fault-finding, it was about restoration. Each Marine she passed met her gaze with the same quiet realization that respect, once broken, can only be rebuilt by consistency. The wind carried the faint scent of oil and sweat, the tangible residue of correction. Hale's boots stopped at the center of the formation. She turned, facing them fully, her hands clasped behind her back. Her voice, when it came, was low, controlled, and steady. She spoke of discipline not as punishment, but as duty to one another, of leadership as a weight, not a privilege, of how arrogance blinds faster than fatigue. Her tone carried no anger, no theatrics, only gravity, the kind that comes from lived truth. Each phrase landed with the weight of experience, her cadence unhurried, her pauses intentional. The Marines did not flinch. They listened. The ones who had mocked her now stood straighter, the color returning to their faces, shame burning into conviction. As she spoke, light filtered through the high windows of the command building behind her. It cast long shadows across the field, each one aligned, rows of silhouettes standing in silent formation, identical in outline if not yet in worth. She reminded them that uniforms are not armor, they are mirrors. That every crease, every salute, every order given or received reflects not just individual pride, but collective purpose. And that when one Marine forgets that, the entire formation carries the weight. Her words didn't rise. They deepened. By the time she fell silent, the air felt heavier, not oppressive, but full. A base once indifferent now held its breath under renewed command. The sound that followed was simple boots adjusting, dust shifting, the faint metallic click of heels aligning. Hale's gaze moved once more across the line. She saw remorse, but more importantly, she saw understanding, the kind that rebuilds what lectures cannot. Then she turned her attention to the operations tent. Once again, orders followed, concise, measured, impossible to mistake. A full systems review before 0500 hours, recon reassigned for field audit, training drills realigned with the Marine Expeditionary Standards, each instruction delivered not as punishment but as opportunity, the chance to reclaim integrity. The Marines acknowledged her directives in silence, but their movement afterward carried a rhythm that had been missing for weeks. The metallic snap of rifle slings, the synchronized motion of gear checks, the tightening of straps and posture, all small signs that discipline, once fractured, had begun to knit itself whole again. Hale watched them disperse, her expression calm. The sunlight reached her boots now, the dust rising faintly with each step. Behind her, the flag lifted in the wind, fully unfurled for the first time since the storm had cleared. Her presence was less weight now, more center. What had begun as confrontation had become correction, and correction had become renewal. At the far end of the yard, the Marine who had shoved her earlier stood alone, helmet tucked under one arm. His eyes tracked her movements, but no longer with defiance. What replaced it was the quiet look of someone who had learned something irreversible. Hale met his gaze only once, long enough for recognition, not accusation. Then she turned toward the command post. The voiceover of the moment, unseen but felt, would frame the image. Leadership does not raise its voice. It steadies its hand. As she stepped back into the operations tent, the base moved as one body again, the hum of equipment, the sound of cadence beyond the walls, the rhythm of discipline restored. The camera lingered on the map table, the red grease line glowing faintly in the light, marking the coordinates where accountability began again. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of respect. Night fell quietly over Camp Ashfall. The floodlights buzzed faintly against the renewed hum of generators, casting long, pale arcs across the empty yard. Rain had returned, softer this time, almost deliberate, as if the sky itself understood what the day had changed. The water gathered in shallow pools along the concrete, reflecting the silver shimmer of the flagpole and the low, patient movements of the night shift. Lieutenant Commander Nora Hale stood alone beneath the overhang of the operations building. Her posture was calm, composed, shoulders squared beneath the weight of fatigue and fulfillment. Around her, the base breathed differently now. Orders carried cadence, steps aligned, conversations softened. The chaos that had once filled these halls had been replaced by the quiet rhythm of respect, reborn. She walked the length of the corridor where the moment had begun. The same steel wall that had once caught her fall now glistened under rain and floodlight. Her gloved fingers brushed against its surface, tracing the faint scuff where her shoulder had struck. The mark was nearly gone, but not erased. The concrete bore the memory like a scar healed cleanly. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her reflection faint in the wet metal. The night pressed close around her, wind pushing softly at the edges of her cover, the smell of rain mingling with diesel and earth. In that quiet space, she let herself feel the weight of what had been restored. Leadership, she knew, was not measured by the silence of submission, but by the steadiness that followed correction. In the distance, movement flickered under the lights. A small training group moved across the field, rifles slung, shoulders squared, formation tight. Their boots struck the mud in perfect rhythm, the sound slow, deliberate, disciplined. Hale watched from the shadows as they moved past the range flags. No laughter this time, no bravado, just the hum of endurance returning to form. Her gaze lifted toward the command tower, where a Marine now stood at watch, posture precise, eyes forward, hand resting on the rail with intent. That simple act, repeated hundreds of times across bases around the world, carried meaning again. Duty had rediscovered its voice. Hale turned her head slightly, the brim of her cover dripping with rain. The droplets fell onto her sleeve, darkening the fabric in small, uneven patches. Each drop merged into another, tracing quiet rivers down the edge of her uniform. The rain was cleansing, yes, but it also spoke of continuity, discipline, like weather, must be maintained, or it erodes without warning. Her mind drifted briefly to the faces she had seen throughout the day, the pride, the guilt, the awakening. She thought of the Marine who had shoved her, the one who had learned the cost of casual arrogance. His silence during formation had spoken louder than apology ever could. Growth, she had long believed, is best measured in restraint. Hale stepped closer to the open yard, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The field stretched before her, vast, glistening beneath the floodlights. Beyond it, the flag moved slowly in the wind, its motion rhythmic, constant. A voiceover would fit here, quiet, reverent, describing her not as a victor, but as a steward. She had not conquered a unit, she had restored it, and in doing so, she had reminded them, and herself, that leadership is not possession, it is presence. The rain thickened, but she didn't move. The drops blurred the edges of light into a soft haze, turning the hard lines of the base into something almost beautiful. The metallic tang of wet steel mixed with the scent of grass just beyond the perimeter fence. Behind her, the last of the night drills concluded. Commands echoed faintly, measured, confident. The sound that followed was not applause, but something greater, collective purpose. Hale exhaled slowly, the breath misting in the cool air. For the first time since her arrival, her posture eased. The tension that had carried her through confrontation, revelation, and instruction now settled into quiet assurance. She reached into her breast pocket and withdrew the small object she had carried all day, the dog tag worn smooth by years of touch. It belonged to someone she had once served under, someone who had taught her the same lesson she had just passed on. Respect isn't enforced, it's remembered. Her thumb brushed the engraved letters once before she returned it to her pocket. Turning toward the gate, she began to walk. Her steps were unhurried, her silhouette dissolving slowly into the rain. Behind her, the base continued its rhythm, lights steady, discipline alive again. The sound of her boots softened against the wet ground until only the rain remained. The final shot held her in profile, a figure half-shadowed, half-illumined, framed by the soft fall of rain and the unfurled flag above. The voice of the narrator closed the story in silence, leaving only the echo of her presence. Respect remembered, order restored. And in the quiet after, the lesson endured. What do you hold on to when the mission ends and the noise finally dies? The gunmetal fades, the orders stop, and all that's left is breath. The slow kind you forget to notice when survival takes over. She didn't win anything out there, she just refused to lose what mattered. Sometimes command isn't loud. It's the quiet correction that ripples through everyone who saw it. Tell me what you would have done, standing in that same silence. Drop a comment. I read them all. If her steadiness meant something to you, like subscribe, and stay with us for the next story that reminds you, control isn't about power, it's about presence. Share this with someone who leads by force, and show them what respect looks like when it walks alone. The base is still, the flag steady in the wind, debriefs over, integrity holds.